name is
Yeah.
Dr. Paul Yuille. And I have an agency that deals with understanding sustainability for different brands and different journeys when it comes to questioning what sustainability means to them. My PhD was in critical consumer studies, which related to how the consumer understands fast fashion and what it means with regards to their consumption behaviours around that. One of my brands I work with is the lovely THTC, and that's who invited me along today. So thank you for the invite, Gab.
Great. And Sophie?
Yeah, so hi everyone, my name is Sophie. Thank you so much for having me here today. I run a small sustainable brand called Agnes London. Agnes London was founded in about 2018 and has kind of followed my own personal journey to try and lead a more sustainable lifestyle. So as part of that, I have a product range which is all handmade by myself with lifestyle products, like things that you might want for your home, like aprons, tea towels, that kind of thing, all with an emphasis on sustainable fashion, sustainable fabrics, and also items that hopefully help you reduce plastic and the need for single-use items in your life. And since then, I've built on that, and I also have previously, before we went into lockdown, I was running events and upcycling workshops, teaching people how to sew and putting the emphasis on if we can sew and we can repair our clothes, it makes them last so much longer and hopefully sends less textiles to landfill. So since everything has gone online, I've also launched a YouTube channel where I put together lots of sewing videos and things like that in the hope of inspiring other people to have a go with a sewing machine or a hand sewing needle.
Very cool, very cool. And Gab?
So I run a brand called THTC Clothing, which I co-founded with my brother and a friend called Dan Sodergren in 1999, off the back of a hemp awareness society that my brother started at Hull University about 3 or 4 years prior to that. So our goal was really to bring hemp to the high street in some sort of form. None of us come from a fashion background, but we are kind of, we were early environmental activists, inspired really by David Attenborough and growing up in the country and that sort of thing. And so we figured the best way to bring hemp to the high street was to do clothing. And after starting in Romania with a big, broad range of fabrics and designs, we cut back to t-shirts. So we really specialize in hemp t-shirts, streetwear. We work with a lot of musicians and actors and quite well-known people, from Ed Sheeran to Woody House and Danny Dyer, people like that who have worn and kind of championed the clothes over the years. And then in 2008, Dr. Paul, I should say, joined us, and we tried to launch an ethical fashion agency to promote various different brands, eco brands. But unfortunately, it was about 6 months before the financial crash, and it was a really tough time to do it. So we dismantled that, and since then we've been providing, and we do a lot of merchandise for bands and labels and that kind of thing. But it's mainly quite activist and music inspired hemp streetwear. That's what we do.
Very cool, very cool. And last but not least, Kerry. Oh, let's see, Kerry, I think your might be turned off. We can't hear you.
Are you on mute? No. Mm-hmm. Paul, do you want to sing a little song? Or do some beatboxing?
No.
No, okay.
We're still not getting anything, sorry. Still can't.
Let's see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes!
Really?
Yay!
You when I'll have to keep unplugging my mic somehow, so really sorry about this. Okay,
All
so
good.
Wilde, I have been in the fast fashion industry since '99, which kind of makes me sound really old. But I studied fashion in Nottingham, and then I went to London and I worked for various brands as a garment technologist. So I'm kind of really specialized in supply chain and manufacturing, but also kind of like the architect of the garment, so engineering the garment to end use. So I've worked on women's wear, menswear, children's wear across brands like Arcadia Group and All Saints, and worked in many different places in the world like China, India, Bangladesh, Turkey, Portugal. The list could go on. So realizing that being in that fast fashion world wasn't for me a few years ago, and opting into retraining into like holistic therapies. So what I do now is I actually specialize in styling as a way. So I felt like in the macro, working and living in this kind of conglomerate and feeling like a tiny piece in the puzzle that wasn't going to change fast fashion as just being one person in it, I decided to opt out and kind of retrain in lots of different things such as styling and yoga and holistic well-being, lots of different therapies. And now that work all unites in my lens of styling, and it's actually working with customers or clients to really understand how their wardrobe can be worn in a whole new way. So it's more looking at that kind of closing the loop on what they already own, and restyling and repurposing what they have, but also that real holistic thinking of clothing as something more meaningful than just a piece of fabric or just a piece of clothing. So we look at like the deeper meaning of why they own what they have, and actually their style direction as a form of self-expression. I'm also a technical brand consultant for brands that haven't got that expertise that I have. So I work with brands that are starting up, so they really get those structures in place around their product development cycle and understanding quality assurance and auditing and that kind of stuff. So I'm really glad to be here. I'm really honoured. So thank you, and sorry I've had some technical difficulties.
Absolutely, no problem. All right, let's get started with our first question. We'll start it off with an easy one. So what are your favorite sustainable fashion brands and why?
Paul?
I honestly, so part of my sort of position is that obviously THTC is wonderful, but when it comes to what we're doing with brands, a big sort of influence for me is where you're getting to swap your clothing. So I'm going to slide and say that I like companies like Depop, Thrift Plus, Loanhood, Vinted, where there is no more clothes getting made. So the most sustainable thing we could do is not make any more clothes. Controversial, but I believe that we've got enough clothes in the world already, and if we're going to buy something, it should last for a long time. So I would rather see an endorsement for these companies that are helping move around the clothing that already exists. So that's a bit of a slippery answer, sorry.
All good, very cool. And Sophie?
Yeah, so I definitely think Birdsong is a great fashion brand that lead the way in terms of transparency. I think they're really open with their customer about everything from sourcing to manufacture to the cost. And I think it's quite important to be educating our customers on the cost of putting together sustainable fashion. And then on the other hand, I've been following lots of brands recently that are doing a lot of made to order stuff. Like I think Megan Crosby, people like that. And I just think those kind of brands are absolutely fantastic, you know, only really making what they need, getting their orders in kind of before they start to order in their fabric and stuff like that. So it really reduces the amount of waste in the supply chain. And made to order pieces are a bit more of an investment. So at least you know that if someone is investing in a made to order piece, the chances are that it's going to stay in their wardrobe for a long time and have a lot more meaning to them. And then on the other aspect of that, kind of similar to what Paul was saying as well, I think clothing rental is massive, and it's only going to grow as well. And like, there's some fantastic brands like Bundly Baby will do baby clothes and children's clothes, which obviously that is a children grow so quickly that that's a massive turnaround in clothes. So I think rental platforms like By Rotation and Her that are all peer-to-peer, I think those are all great alternatives to fashion brands, especially if you want something a bit more special for like a wedding or a birthday or something like that that you may only want to wear once. You know, it kind of combats that, like, I've worn it once on Instagram, so I can't be seen in it again. Because you can send it back. So yeah, those are a few of my brands that I'm kind of loving at the moment.
Yeah, totally.
I totally agree with Paul and Sophie about, you know, the importance of not over consuming, and you know, I have a strange relationship with running an ethical, a fashion business in general, because A, I'm not from a fashion background, and B, the whole concept of fashion is that, you know, something from last season is no longer relevant and it should be discarded and got rid of. So I think there's a massive role to play in upcycling and in taking pride in not buying the latest thing, but actually in wearing something that you bought 10 years ago, you know, and really a uniqueness to that. But I was inspired when I started by a few of the hemp brands such as Hoodlum and the Hemp Shop in Brighton, Satori Movement, Hemp Valley. There's a few others, you know, that were around kind of when I started, and Howie's as well, because they're kind of streetwear, outdoorsy kind of cycling. And brands like that, which weren't necessarily pushing sustainability as their whole raison d'etre, because sustainability wasn't really a catchword in fashion then. So just brands that were doing the right things in the background quietly, which I think was really important. I love Patagonia because of all their activist work and, you know, and what they do. I'd really aspire for THTC to be more like them. I love the way Nudie allow you to take your jeans back and they'll repair them for you if they're damaged, that sort of thing. You know, it's not exactly upcycling, but it's making things last. So yeah, and then in terms of shoes, there's obviously trainers. There's a lot of exposure about how badly people are treated in garment manufacturing, but trainers seems to be a big one, sportswear in particular. So I'd like to give a shout to Pozu. Love their shoes. They're doing really good things. Veja, Athletic, Viva Barefoot. I've done a bit of research with some others. I'm going to put some links at the bottom afterwards of some other ethical brands that I like. But yeah, I think as Paul and Sophie have alluded to, upcycling and taking real pride in wearing older clothes and repairing them yourselves. I think there should be more effort put into encouraging people to get their own sewing machine and upcycle their own clothes and just that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. This stuff, some great places. I know I'm mentally taking notes for some new places to look at. And so Kerry, what about you?
Oh, gone again.
Oh wait, we can't hear you. Kerry.
Oh
no. Let's see.
Oh
no. I feel like she's looking right at me too. I'm like, oh, we can't hear you.
Can we put this in the comments here? Yeah, right.
Let's see. Yes, maybe she'll be able to read a comment.
I mean, until Kerry comes back, should we keep on? Because again,
we
she
move
sees
on
that we're
to
speaking.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, let's just move
And I think it would be
on.
great if we get Kerry's answers later and put them in the message for the viewers. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, I know. I'd love to hear what she's got to say. So the next question is, so most of us do know that the fashion industry is pretty bad for the environment, but a lot of people don't fully understand why. What do each of you believe is the biggest reason that the fashion industry is harmful to the environment?
Paul?
I appreciate you putting me forward every time, Gavin. You're going first next time.
Feel free to jump in, no order.
It's fine. I'm very happy to answer it first. And
I think Kerry's there.
Are you back? Is Kerry back? No. Okay, we still can't hear. So I'll continue. So the reasons, in my mind, is to do with the production of the fashion clothing. For me, that's the issue. It's not only how it's produced, but it's the volume in which it's produced. When we talk about sustainability basically means that we're allowed to do something for a bit longer, just sort of eking along. My personal opinion is we have to really reshape the entire fashion industry, which is no mean feat. And I think when it comes to where sort of the emphasis should lie, it's really within the production of it, it's from the consumption of it, how long we own it for, how durable we are with the look that we've got, and how comfortable we are with wear. I think one of the things for me is this constant need for newness that is a real problem with the entire industry, especially fast fashion. So it has to look brand new. You mentioned Instagram earlier. It's this idea where there is platforms that require you to have a new look every time you're. That's just ridiculous. That's just completely unsustainable. But when it comes to where we should be going, I believe we have to really look at how we're understanding the consumer's needs. Because there's real benefits to fashion, right? I mean, there's a huge amount of benefit to feeling a certain way, to being proud in your appearance, to not necessarily wearing old clothes, to not necessarily wearing hand-me-downs or things that have been given elsewhere, but to balance that new consumption with what you've already got. And I think for me, where the biggest damage is, it's that constant drive for newness that is the biggest problem with the industry. If we were to just pump the brakes, slow down, accept that we have to start reducing the amount that we're producing, because it's really the production, because then the consumption doesn't take all of that production. Then we've got these mountains of clothes rotting, getting burnt, getting put back into landfill. It's ridiculous, but with tags still on them. So for me, it's less of the production, and accepting new isn't best.
Very true. Very good. Let's see. Sophie, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I feel like I agree with much of what Paul said, and I feel like my answer would be very similar. You know, overconsumption is definitely the driving factor of the fashion industry. It's getting faster and faster all the time, and I think that, as I mentioned before, like education is really important, and it's not just fashion. We're the same with our food. We're the same with our makeup. And like lots of other industries, we're so disconnected with how stuff is made, where it comes from, what goes into it, who's making it. We just want a bargain, and we want it now, and we want to. So I think education is really important, because the more we can get the customer to kind of slow down and think, and obviously it's hard, like this information isn't out there to us. These massive fast fashion brands are not publishing this information. So I think that the more we can educate customers, and the more we can kind of put that emphasis on using what you've already got, upcycling, things like that, then that will help the fashion industry. Sorry, that doesn't really answer your question. But I think, yeah, if there was more awareness about how harmful the dyes are, how much water goes into a pair of jeans and things like that, then I think customers and consumers would be much more aware of the impact their purchases are having.
Yes, definitely.
Yes, it's a little hard to add to those two answers because they've covered most of it. But unchecked.
Yeah.
What Sophie said, it's not just an issue about fashion. It's through where your phone comes from. It's from where your food, everything comes from. Essentially, it's unchecked capitalism, isn't it? If there'll always be a market for cheap stuff while there's poverty. And I think that is that is one of the main underlying factors, but also transparency. If people actually know, if it's all over the front pages of the papers, naming and shaming brands, particularly for spending more money essentially on PR to make themselves look greener than to actually raise their production standards, which loads of them will do, and that I think that's a massive issue. Also, localism, a more localized production. When we got into the hemp scene 21 years ago, we were thinking within a few years, hopefully there'll be hemp textile industry in the UK, or if not in Europe. There's still not, and there's a lot more awareness of ethical, sustainable factories and fabrics, but still it's very limited to where you can actually get it. If you actually turn the tap off and everyone was to boycott, fast fashion, then the other issue is what's going to happen to all the textile workers. They still need to be supported and still need to make a living. So it's about, I think, as we've all said, buying less, but buying better quality, but making sure that money that we're spending actually reaches the garment workers themselves. If you buy a pair of trainers, and I'm not going to name any brands because we all know who they are, buy a pair of trainers for £150 and $1 going to the person that actually made them, there's something horrifically wrong with that. What's wrong with paying them $5, for instance? So consumerism.
Can I add into that, Gavin? Because I think that there's something to be said, just not to get controversial on it, but I think the consumer is so numb to the shock of what's happening in these factories. The consumer is just so numb to it all and disenfranchised when it comes to the agency they need to do it. And I really want to support your point about we can't just switch it off overnight, right? It's not an industry we can just stop, because that's insane. So the analogy I like to use is we're on an escalator. We just need to start slowing that escalator down. We need to start pumping the brakes and understanding that it'll take decades to get out of this situation. But with these sort of debates and these sort of conversations, it's really heartening to know that there is reality here, eh? I mean, because the consumer just knows what's going on in these factories, but they're without agency, presumably, and the only tool they have is not to buy. That's what I want to.
I don't know if they are so aware with what's going on, in that they presume that because these companies are so well known, it can't be as bad as it actually is, that it's so in your face, the marketing, the advertising is so in your face that you're thinking, hey, how sinister can these brands actually be, and how bad can the production be if it's not in your face? I mean, all we could do, Paul, you did the same for THTC, is actually go over to the factories yourselves and go and speak to the workers. I mean, every company or every small company should be able to do that. It's a little bit out of your hands, I guess, when you're producing on such a main scale, but it needs to be made a priority to actually go there and actually communicate with these people and give them a platform and a voice to be able to pass over their experience. And Fashion Revolution, that's exactly kind of what they stand for. I would really advise everyone to subscribe to Ethical Consumer, the website or the magazine, because that is incredibly eye-opening. You're not going to get it from the mainstream press that Boohoo is, for instance. I said I wasn't going to name and shame, but I will happily name and shame Boohoo because it's public knowledge what they're doing anyway. But you're not going to find this from the mainstream press. You really have to look for it.
Yeah. Just to add to your point about Boohoo, I think it hit home a lot more last summer when it came out about Boohoo and the factories in Leicester, and their workers there. I think it felt a lot more on people's doorsteps, that we didn't think that would happen in kind of British manufacturing. British made is seen as like a kind of stamp of like quality, and I think it really kind of hit home the conditions there, because we think of these awful factory conditions as being in another country, far away, not on our doorstep, where the living wage is so much lower. And and I heard the argument like, well, if they weren't working in these factories, what would they do, etc. So I think when it is actually in the press and it starts to hit home a bit more, then people do take notice of it.
Absolutely. And there's,
Yeah,
there are
definitely.
good and bad. There are good, I mean, for people to just say, oh, you can't produce in China. Don't produce in China. Their human rights are terrible. It's true. They have real human rights issues. But, there's good factories in China and there's terrible factories in Leicester. So it really is not quite that simplistic. And we can't, as we mentioned earlier, you can't just turn off the tap for these people wherever they are in the world. It's a global issue. But as Sophie said, if it's on your doorstep, and they're people that look like you, that you might know that are around the corner from you, then it hits you in the face a lot more. But essentially, it should be the same issue wherever they are, these people. And poverty in Leicester is just as real as it is in China, if you're living it.
Definitely. Let's see, Kerry, do you want to try? I know she's been working on her mic issues. Hopefully, maybe now she can chime in and catch up on everything.
No.
Nope.
We've got a few questions coming in, or are we going to look at those at the end?
I think, yeah, we'll do those questions closer towards the end. Let's see. Kerry wants to try one more thing. She's still working it out with the tech guy. Okay. While we continue on. So let's see. So I know a lot of people assume sustainable fashion isn't always affordable to the everyday consumer. Do you think this is true? Do you have any tips on how to become more sustainable when it comes to fashion without spending a lot of money? I know we've talked mainly, the biggest thing is re-wearing what you already have, but do you have any tips for maybe shopping sustainably?
Oh.
Happy to go first. Because then I get all the best answers. So no, it's a really good question, and it's something that Gav touched on earlier. Where if you're buying a T-shirt for £5, you've got to know that wasn't done in a fair way, and that's not using decent fabrics. It's using highly blended fabrics that can't be broken down or recycled in any way. Like that is a one-use garment. Okay, so you're wearing that till you can't be bothered with it, and then you get rid of it. The big thing for me is where the consumer. I mean, again, I come back to the consumer because I feel like that is where the sort of the biggest power lies, like to empower the consumer to not accept brands behaving a certain way. So one of the things for me is to understand as a consumer, if it costs £5, probably wasn't cool how it was made. So it's about understanding we might have to buy less but spend more. So it's an old-fashioned adage, isn't it? So you say buy once and buy well. But I do still think there's an aspect about how affordable sustainable fashion is. I think it's insane how we became numb to the reality of the cost of things. So Vivienne Westwood's, I'm not going to name drop, but one of my favorite brands, because she's consistently over the years challenged the zeitgeist, but also had her voice front and center. So again, I can't afford Vivienne Westwood, that's insane. But I can then look at where again, that's why I would plug Thrift Plus for this, because again, Thrift Plus is a place where you're getting clothing a much reduced price because it's been donated by a consumer. It's in good nick, or it can be straight from a photo shoot that's not going to go back onto our website. The price that you pay, half of it goes to a charity of the choice of the person who donates it. And I think there's lots of these interesting little platforms popping up that helps you buy sustainably. I haven't bought something new in years. It's all been vintage. It's all been secondhand. So just to answer the question really quickly, secondhand shops. But what rule of thumb? If there's a young person working there who looks quite trendy, walk back out. They've got all the best stuff. Go far afield and really try and dig around and give it the time you need to really find the style that you like. Because style is about being individual, right? It's not about looking like clones. We don't wear uniforms for a reason. We're not all walking about in jumpsuits looking the same. So I think it's about finding your own individual style and mixing it up with different things to make sure that you get to express yourself without doing too much damage.
Yeah. Am I muted? No. So to add to that, I would definitely say don't waste your money on trends that you are only going to wear for one summer or whatever, because then it won't last. It won't stay in your wardrobe. Another point is clothing swaps are fantastic, and if obviously they are not in-person events not really happening at the moment, but if you can just swap with a few friends, or when events do start to go again, then go to some clothing swaps. They have them all over the country. Like, just look on Facebook, like there'll be one locally to you. Go along to that, swap. I think also, if you have ever tried to make your own clothes, you would appreciate why they should not be so cheap. When you've spent a whole day trying to make a dress or something like that, you would think, okay, I've just poured my heart and soul into this. If I then want to go and sell this to someone, I'm not going to sell it to them for a tenner. You know, I would want a lot more money for my time and effort and skills that have gone into it. So yeah, and obviously we keep going back to the point of upcycling, repairing, and charity shops and things like that. And that is because there is so many clothes out there that there is plenty for all of us. If I know we've said we can't turn off the tap, but if we did turn off the tap, there are enough clothes out of there that we would all be absolutely fine.
And yeah, I mean, I think it's in the language, isn't it? When people's perception, when people will come up to me at festivals, and you know, it really hit home a few years ago after about 10 people coming up and saying, "Oh, I love your hemp socks. Why are they so expensive?" And to me, it was just so obvious. I think we're asking the wrong questions. It's not why is ethical fashion expensive. It's why is non-ethical fashion so cheap, and what is the actual cost to the planet and to the people, you know? And you know, as Sophie and Paul have mentioned as well, you know, it's our expectations of what we would pay for a product are so skewed, and it's, you know, it's really all about our priorities. If people knew that the woman that made your dress might well be working 7 days a week, 15 hours a day, sleeping under her sewing machine, you know, and maybe raising a child under the sewing machine as well. You know, if these images were in front of us and we're actually able to make these decisions, I would be a lot better armed to make these decisions. And yeah, also it's impossible to judge people who are, you know, I think sustainability and saving the planet, sadly, is a middle class issue. It's for big business and middle class, because if you're trying to raise 5 kids and you can't put food on the table, and you've got people preaching to you about why they should go and buy sustainable clothing, you know, I don't blame them if they go to Primark. You know, it's the people that do know better or should know better, that can afford not to. You know, I'm a massive one for boycotts, whether it's food. I love boycotting a brand that I hate. It really makes me feel empowered. I just love not giving my hard-earned money to these scumbags. So, you know, it's empowering people to make these decisions and actually take pride in going, hey, you know, I'm not going to name and shame more brands here or companies, but, you know, whether it's a fast food company or a soft drink or whatever it is, you find out what these people actually are about, you know, the owners of these companies, and whether they've got your and the planet's best interest at heart. And it makes it a lot easier to then boycott them and saying, you know what, I'm not going to buy it anymore.
I'm trying one last time. Does this work? Can you hear me?
Yay!
Yay! Oh, thank God, it's been so difficult. I thought actually it was my webcam that was playing up, so I'll have to have a look at that.
Okay.
Well, you've got an extra hour, go.
I know.
I know you've got some catching up to do, but also shout out to our technical producer, Gray. He is killing it. We are so thankful for him. Perfect. So, Kerry, yeah, let's just catch you up. So we've talked about our favorite sustainable fashion brands. We've talked about why the fashion industry isn't good for the environment, and we just recently were talking about how we can shop sustainable while also not spending too much money. Do you have any thoughts? Want to chime in on any of those?
Yeah, I think you know, so what I was explaining when you absolutely couldn't hear me, and I must have been going on and on with hands because was all about sustainability as an umbrella term, and how these brands that we're looking at may be feeding into one or two of the SDG Sustainable Development Goals. So it's really worth understanding as a consumer your value system and knowing what that particular brand is actually bringing, and how they're shifting the needle in terms of sustainable fashion. Because sustainable and ethical, they're such big terms, and actually it's really worth understanding the 17 SDGs so that you understand what they mean to you. So whether you're looking for a brand that is really has an initiative with a third world initiative that's really empowering women, for instance. I actually interviewed somebody called Nazreen Sheikh, that was a slave labourer in Nepal for the age, I think she doesn't actually know what her birth date is, because these people have absolutely no birth certificates, and they have no rights. They're born without birth certificates, so I don't think they have any way of understanding how the system works. So they're completely exploited. And so she went in as a child slave, and now she's developed an initiative. After coming out of that, she's developed this empowerment collective, it's called. And so understanding that her take on sustainable fashion is really about allowing women and children to be empowered, to have rights, and to be paid fairly. So another good initiative is the Clean Clothes campaign, who did the Pay Up scheme all the way through COVID. So if you're interested in that element, then really looking for brands that are moving beyond this fast fashion system that really doesn't pay workers fairly. It pays maybe the minimum wage, but that really doesn't constitute to a really fair way of life. So I think it's really, when you were thinking of this sustainable umbrella term, it's knowing exactly what that means, because there's so many elements to it. What else did I want to chime in on? There was so much that I was like, I want to say something to this. I really agree with everybody about rental. That is the way the system is with the way we're moving the system in sustainability, is that it's about bottom up and top down. So it's actually about the consumer, educating the consumer as to why they need to shift. But it's also these fast fashion conglomerates, they have to take responsibility. So all of the greenwashing, which we might get into a bit later, but all of these campaigns that we see out there around marketing that we're thinking, they're doing better. Well, they do have to take incremental shifts to shift it. It has to happen. Which is responsible for them. So I feel like it has to come from the consumer, but it also has to be driven bottom down as well. I think they're all my points. Sorry, I was
and you segued in perfectly to our next question, and I believe someone in the comments wrote something kind of similar. So yeah, with the term greenwashing, when brands kind of advertise these sustainable collections, their new policies, can you feel like we can fully believe this? How do we know which brands we can trust? What are some ways to know that we're actually buying sustainable clothes from these more fast fashion brands?
Who's going?
Shall I pipe in? Shall I go first? I mean,
sure.
Thank you. I think Kerry's point is really well made, is that it's about who's moving the needle and how they're moving it. So the SDGs is a really good example of where only buy in companies where your values are attached, right? So you believe if it's no poverty or if it's life under the sea, whatever the SDG that floats your boat, so to speak, look for brands that really put that behind their initiatives. And another thing is the sort of the corporate reports you can get. So I did this a few years ago, but I downloaded all the corporate reports, all of the ethical reports, all the outcomes for all of the high street brands in the UK. And they were all pretty much saying the same thing, that it's 20 years away, 25 years away. And there's these big claims, these big bold claims but you need to keep buying for us to get there. And I found that so frustrating, that the scale of some of these companies is just not sustainable. And there was a couple of brands mentioned earlier. They are really sustainable brands, but they're massive. And I feel like there is this idea of greenwashing is where we've just completely forgotten what it means to be sincere about a claim. And again, I'm sounding like a really jaded old man here, and I think I possibly am, but I think there's something along the lines of challenging your brands to do the things that you want, that are important to you in your value systems. And I think, again, I'm not going to drop any brands into it, but I think there's a few of them that are really focusing on, surprisingly, they're focusing on more with their production, and they're thinking about the education of their production workforce and looking at their life and looking at their livelihoods. So many years ago, I was working in Thailand, and there was a claim there, but it was lifestyle for livelihoods. So the idea was that we were training women who came out of the sex industry, and we were then retraining them to work in factories. And the whole idea being that there was longevity to that in a production job. There was always going to be production. But then again, how you maintain that conversation with the consumer, how you make sure no one gets hurt. It's really hard to believe any high street brand. I'm sorry. I would say there's, hand on heart, there's no one that I would say is doing an exemplary job. I think that the ones that are trying it are doing well, but their scale holds them back. And then the claims that they've made in the past holds them back. Some of the smaller brands that are doing it are too expensive. So then you have this real dichotomy for the consumer. So that's why I think you need to mix and match, inform yourself about your brand, look at like the RAP report, the Higg Index. There's a huge amount of information in the world that actually classifies how well they're doing. And look at these rankings that you get for how sustainable they're behaving, and just don't believe the advertisements, because the advertisement again would tell you buy this and we'll become sustainable. Like we'll be kinder later. So we have to help that brand buy their way. I think that's unacceptable. I think it's up to the brand to make a radical change, to really think about it. I mean, some of the work that's coming out of Selfridges at the moment is fantastic. I've got to say, like, Selfridges is really challenging the fundamentals of retail behavior and really looking at what it is to consume. And I think some of the initiatives that have come out of that are really inspiring, and we need to start looking at these good examples.
Yeah, I think this is a really tough question because on one hand, we kind of can't do it without big brands and big companies coming along. But on the other hand, the business models that they work from and they've made their money from over the years are not sustainable as they are. And I think someone's asked a really great question about how do we know who we can trust when it comes to where our clothes are made behind the scenes. And I think quite simply, if you ask the question and there's no information on the company website, they're not mentioning sustainability, they're not mentioning fair labor, they're not mentioning any of their kind of ethical policies, then I think you can assume that that is not a priority to them and they are not doing that, you know, if they're not putting the information out there, because any brand that is doing that at the moment would be shouting about it. And I think that we've seen these sustainable edits and these, you know, organic collections and these capsule collections. I think this is a sign that these businesses are realizing that this is what the consumer wants and sustainability is important. Unfortunately, I just don't think it's enough, and I don't think it's happening quick enough. And I don't think that dedicating 5% of your business or whatever it is to making a range out of organic cotton or whatever is really going to tackle the, you know, massive problem that we have with sustainability, you know, with fast fashion and the environment. I just don't think it's enough. I think it's a step, but I think it's a very small step in the right direction, and it completely comes from customers voting with our wallets. So yeah, and it's, you know, it's hard to kind of sniff out greenwashing sometimes. They do a great job of it, but that's why they have marketing and PR and stuff like that, and that's because, you know, they want your money. So yeah, I think there's no real easy answer to this, because sometimes, you know, sometimes you kind of, I'm not going to say you need something from the high street, but you know, if, you know, our sustainable brands can be more expensive and you can buy secondhand all you want, but there are a few things that you definitely don't want to be going out and buying secondhand. So and then you have schemes like certain brands do recycling schemes, but if you take your clothes back and recycle them in their store, then they'll give you a voucher for their store, so you can spend more money on their clothes. So it's really tricky, and it's really hard for the consumer to navigate. And I think any brand, any business, I mean, obviously we're seeing like loads and loads of stores closing down on the high street now. Any big brand or big business that is giving smaller businesses a platform to step up and be seen is great. And I hope that some of the empty retail spaces that we're seeing will start to be filled by more smaller brands that do have more ethical practices.
Definitely.
So there was a question asked by, I wonder if this is, asked a question earlier, which was about, well, she was essentially saying should the emphasis be on the brands or on the consumers, to make a positive difference? And while I 100% think it should be on both, brands will listen to consumers if they stop buying their products. If there's a successful exposure and people stop buying them on ethical reasons, then brands will listen. I mean, I had a couple of examples that really frustrated me with THTC with, again, not going to name them, this one, but one of the big retailers where I was trying to get in there for 15 years, I'd say, trying to get a meeting with the buyers for about 15 years. And after just years of constantly hitting them over the head with, can we just have a meeting and talk about sustainable fashion? They came back with, our consumers aren't particularly interested in ethical fashion. And it made me so angry, because I said, your consumers are interested in what you tell them to be interested, because essentially that's what fashion is about. You tell them what's going to be big next season. You tell them that it's a priority, that ethical fashion is going to be big, and they will listen to you, I also had another meeting with another big brand. I don't know how I got in there. And I pitched them on doing a sustainable hemp t-shirt range within their range. And the corporate social responsibility guy told me that he was only in a job because they needed to have a person with the title of corporate social responsibility. And he essentially said to me, look, if we do an ethical, I spoke to the MD, if we do an ethical range with you, then they will come back and they will ask, the customers will then ask, how's the rest of it produced? And we'll be able to say, no idea, sorry about that. They just don't, a lot of them don't want to rock the boat. So it is a subtle and gradual process. But I think it's very important, whilst, the juggernaut that is fast fashion is going to take a long time to turn around. And whilst I think we should be skeptical of big brands who are greenwashing, we should also not shoot them down in flames straight away, because it is these brands that are going to make the biggest difference. So transparency. It's all about transparency.
Yeah, I totally hear that.
Sorry,
and what did you say?
I was going to say celebrity, because another person has asked this question. Do you think celebrity plays a role? And absolutely 100% they do. You look at Victoria Beckham's range, you look at Beyonce's range. These are people with money behind them that have a real platform to create positive change, and neither of their ranges are ethical or ethical. Kim Kardashian, these people are, that they get listened to. They're the biggest influence in the world, and if it's important to them, it becomes important to everyone else.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, I think with greenwashing, it's really, having worked in these fast fashion brands, I know for a fact the conversation is, what can we get away with? What does the consumer want, but how much is that going to sell? What is the margin on that? Profit is the top of the priority list of the KPIs constantly. So I see this as total greenwashing, because it's saying, hey, look what we're doing, because we need to give something to the consumer because there's a trend happening. They want to perform for the trends, but actually the profit margin is their priority over the people and the planet all the time. So we cannot trust these brands. I'm really sorry, but we just can't. That we need them to shift the needle, but it needs to happen much faster than it is. They can take responsibility tomorrow. They could put their people that are in the supply chain at the top of their list tomorrow. They're in the power to do that. So I'm sorry, but it makes me really furious when I see H&M, Primark have got an eco ambassador, and they actually tweeted yesterday, hey, go in for we really want to see our customers going in for a pair of socks and coming out with 3 bags full. I mean, how can you say you've got an eco ambassador and you're going towards this sustainable proposition and then saying this in a tweet to all their customers? It's just, they're not taking responsibility, and that's what we need those big brands to do. And so I do not believe it when the likes of H&M come out with organic cotton. In fact, H&M are doing, they're doing a lot more than other brands are doing. They came up the top of the transparency index last year for Fashion Revolution. However, they may be transparent, but what are they doing? They may be saying these are our factories, but what is happening within those factories? These are the harder issues that they're not talking about. So we know that they may be saying, hey, I'm transparent, but transparent in what? Because I know, having done all the audits, worked in quality assurance, gone to the factories, ticked all the boxes on that particular day. In fact, I was working for All Saints when the Rana Plaza was happening. So I saw that I had to close down factory floors in India to say, you haven't got a fire exit. That, are you working in this factory floor? They had machinery set up and they were like, no, we just need to store machinery here. And then I had to say no, because you must be using it when I walk out of here tomorrow. So these really, the brands are based in London, America, all over the world, those corporate offices. You're not in there every day. So we know that, all of this lack of regulation through fast fashion means that greenwashing, this tiny, they may have a top that's organic cotton. It means nothing. So I don't believe in it. I do believe that they need to. So Mary Portas, I went to a great talk by her the other month, and she was telling me about Lush, the way that they changed their value system around fair trade, and actually really had to take a hit on profit. And they told their customer, this is why product is going to be increasing in price. They were really transparent about why they were shifting and how they were shifting. And they took a massive plummet on profit, but their customers came back. And so these brands have to admit that they have to change and take that hit, but somebody needs to take full responsibility to reimagine what's going to happen afterwards. So hopefully they will make that shift. But yeah, that's kind of all I wanted to say for now. I wouldn't trust them.
Yeah.
If they're producing that model, can't.
Yeah, just talking about celebrities just quickly, and you mentioned the Primark's kind of ethical, sustainable influencer, or what they were called. She got a lot of criticism for working with Primark and coming out and supporting Primark's sustainable range. And yeah, I just fully believe that anyone that has an influence or has a following, whatever they're promoting, they have a due diligence to research it and to know what they're actually pushing out to their followers and what they're actually promoting. And and also like all these YouTubers and influencers that do fast fashion hauls and like have their bags and bags full of stuff from Primark. Like, one thing like everyone who's watching this can do today is literally just go and unfollow those people that do those fast fashion hauls, because there is absolutely no need for them.
There's nothing more enraging than seeing people walking around on the tube with 4 huge bags from Primark that say this is a green bag on the outside. It's full of stuff made by slaves that's destroying the planet. It's so upsetting. It's I remember when a while ago when Tesco, one of my other favourite boycotts, they came out with a fair trade T-shirt for about £4, and everyone lost their mind, going, "Brilliant! Let's go and buy fair trade T-shirts from." Companies like that can have a lost leader, where people will then stop buying off of actually genuinely ethical brands because they think they're filling their ethical fashion quota by buying a T-shirt from Tesco. It's infuriating. There's just from what Kerry was mentioning earlier about Lush. I think it's very interesting. There's a book called The Ethical Capitalist about the guy that started Richer Sounds, and he was essentially, if you're investing in your staff and your people and paying people well, then over the long term it actually works out being better for your business, and profits will be better because your staff will stay with you longer. There'll be more trust within the industry, and overall It's a long game, but overall, it's going to work out better for your brand than just rinsing people for profits.
Again, but it's about bravery, right? So again, something Kerry said too. It's about being brave as a brand owner. It's about taking it for a bit, putting your ethics behind it. But again, it's also, we've not mentioned the elephant in the room for me, which is policy. There's no policy on this. When it comes to the 1 pence levy, everyone look up the 1 pence levy, a ridiculous motion that was put across that every item sold in fast fashion brands should have sent 1 pence to improve the situation when it comes to the ethical balance of it. It didn't even go through. It lasted maybe 3 months and it got rejected. So the government doesn't get involved. There's no policy getting written around to stop this. It's running away with itself. It's like, for me personally, I think there's a lot to be said for the bravery in the brands that do it, but the bravery in the consumer to wear old clothes. I mean, and again, there's great policy. We've heard today, the Transparency Index, Who Made My Clothes, ethical fashion, the Ethical Fashion Index. We've got a huge amount of information that you start looking at brands that are getting there. It's always when the leadership is willing to take the hit and is willing to be brave.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add in there, the Fashion Roundtable as well are really providing insight into how to push legislation forward, because that is what we need, especially they're kind of a UK-based kind of governing body, so they're trying to well, in fact, they wrote a white paper, I think it was 2 years ago, and it got chucked out of Parliament, all about taking, retailers taking responsibility for their whole supply chain. So if you wanted to understand more about that, Fashion Roundtable is really worth to get involved in.
Yeah.
I'd like to give
I think
a common objective. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. It's a quick point. Going back to what Paul said, before I really got into sustainability, I knew about the issues. But in my head, I thought that it was up to governments and environmental charities and big businesses to fix them. It wasn't until I actually started learning about things that I could do myself, and that there were things that I could do every day to make a change. And we've said, with these fashion brands having like a sustainable edit or whatever, that the responsibility is on the brands. And I feel a bit reluctant to say that, because I don't want people to kind of think, well, I can carry on as I am because I'm waiting for the brands to change. And I'm also very conscious that life is stressful. We have a lot of things to deal with, and it's hard to say to people, you need to change or you need to do this. But ultimately, a lot of responsibility is on the consumer, and there are definitely things that we can all be doing to impact change.
Those of us
I just wanted to add, you can actually write to your MP tonight, because on Fashion Roundtable they have a template, and so if you feel fired up about any of these issues and you want to stir up and make a move towards legislation changing, write to your MP. We are all empowered enough to do that. Yeah.
And just wanted to finally make a point, just give a plug to Common Objective, who used to be Ethical Fashion Forum many years ago and were really the leaders in bringing ethics to the fashion industry in the mainstream and starting the conversation. So I just wanted to mention them. And as I mentioned, Ethical Consumer magazine or website is just a great resource for not just fashion but for all your products.
Great. Oh, such great information. I feel like I'm going to be doing so much work. So we'll do one last question, and then we'll look at a few audience questions if you guys are good to run over just a little bit. So I know we've kind of touched on this, but what are your predictions for the future of the fashion industry? Do you think it can ever become completely, fully sustainable? Just what are your thoughts on that?
I'll jump in there. I might as well.
Okay.
So I asked this question to Ursula de Castro, who's the founder of Fashion Revolution, in Clubhouse the other week, and she was like, "I'm not a psychic. I'm not going to answer that." However, she had said previous to that in an interview, the future of fashion is made up of lots of little initiatives. So it's like lots of little things are going to make this great shift. And I really do believe that. I think it's going to take the consumer doing things differently. It's going to take education of our children, the next generation, and maybe a syllabus change in schooling of including sustainable and ethical practice from a really early age. I think it's going to take all the shareholders and stakeholders that are in these fashion brands and businesses to take ownership, and that doesn't mean just from the governance of the corporates and letting that trickle down. I think it's about self-empowerment. So even people, like me, that had a position in a corporate brand, actually what my value system didn't come into play. I knew it wasn't ethical. Some of the decisions I had to make, oh, this is going to close a factory down, but we're going to pull out of this order. We need to, because of margin. We're going, there's going to be a delay on this, so let's pull out of that. All of these unethical ways that we were putting strain on people that are already in a disempowered position in the supply chain. I was having to make those really unhealthy decisions, knowing that it wasn't helpful for the greater good of the people or the planet. So me going and studying sustainable innovation, and for me that was my own way of empowering myself in the work that I do. But I feel like everybody can do this, no matter where you are, who you're working for, wherever you are in education. It's taking responsibility. And then I do feel like it's all of these little shifts. And actually I feel like there's got to be a release of what we had in fast fashion being so accessible. It's like the Amazon culture, isn't it? That, oh my God, I'm not going to get it in one day, I'm going to get it in two. Suddenly we're in this mindset, and I think of it as a man-made mind construct. Actually, it's how can we dismantle this fast culture that we're in and come home. And I think, sorry, I've forgotten your name, but you said about the escalator. It's about this slowing everything right down. And I call it the art of slow in my work. It's really about coming back to the body. And so I feel like before I did yoga or meditation or actually came home to myself, I didn't really care about the earth. I didn't really I did care about the earth, but it was all up here until I came home to myself and my body, and the fact that everything was interconnected. Then I was like, now I understand I can see the macro for what it is. So I feel like there's a whole self-development cycle that has to take place, like a personal development journey. And that's when people are gonna have a clearer awakening or insight into how they can make shifts in their own lives. So yeah, there's so much more. There's mending, also DeCastro's written a book about that. I've got a friend that's also a founding member of Fashion Revolution that set up a pattern shop called Mend Assembly, which is in Totnes. And actually, rather than it being a shop full of clothes, it's a shop full of patterns, and it's a micro factory. And she calls the fast fashion industry fabricated demand, demand that comes from nowhere. Do we need more? Probably not. So she's opening up this Mend Assembly where you go in, you get things, you understand how to make and mend your clothing, but also you can go in and look at for a pattern and say, oh, I'd love to invest in that suit. So, and get something made in the micro factory. So I think there's going to be so many different stakeholders bringing it all together to make that bigger shift. That's me done. Thank you.
Sophie or me? Sorry. Yeah, go.
Oh, we can't hear you.
I can't hear you.
Sorry, I'd muted myself. So in answer to that question, another question I saw pop up about regarding whether this should be taught in schools, and I know you kind of touched on this point as well, Kerry. I think absolutely it should be, but ultimately there are so many things we need to be teaching in schools that we are not doing. There's so many things that needed to be added to the syllabus, and that is just a small part of them. We need to be teaching in schools a lot more about social media, about finances, and things like that. So yeah, it should be, but I think it's unlikely that it will be added to the curriculum anytime soon. And as for predictions for the fashion industry, I think after 2020 and this year, we're going to see the biggest shift in the industry that we've possibly ever seen. You know, we haven't had like just even things like virtual fashion shows and stuff like that. And I've seen some brands putting together some really innovative ways of displaying their new collections to customers. And so I'm not really sure what the future looks like, but I think the future going forward really looks different. And I think it'll be really interesting to watch the fashion industry over the next few years. And as I've said before, I really hope that the shift in what's happened and consumer trends over the last year, I really hope it gives way for more smaller brands to be able to break through and to educate their consumers. And also going slightly back to my point on celebrities as well, when they're endorsing all these large fashion brands, obviously they get the big paychecks for these fashion brands, but if they were to endorse a smaller brand, that just does so much for these smaller brands. So yeah, my hope is that the future goes more towards shopping small.
Mm-hmm. I would just add a couple of points to that, in that, you know, I think there'll always be a market, not a place, but a market for cheap products as long as there's poverty, you know, so it's going to be systemic. It's education, and it's about, you know, being bold and strong enough to actually act on those beliefs and decide if we're all guilty of it. We see something we want, big and shiny, we'll go and buy it. But, you know, it's about being able to say no and being able to say, have I actually got enough? I mean, it's no surprise really for anyone that knows Ursula that she's kind of leading the way in these upcycling type of events. And you know, with a lot of the high street shops going to be abandoned, and, you know, after COVID, things are going to change a lot. I'd love to see, you know, garment workers and people that actually know how to use sewing machines being able to, you know, put on a lot more of these type of events where people bring their old clothes, give them maybe 2 or 3 items and get them to upcycle it into something completely brand new and totally unique, and then pay them for the actual work of doing that, you know. And I think there will hopefully just be a lot more effort being put into individualism as opposed to just you know, everyone looking the same. So yeah, so power to Ursula.
Yeah, just to, I'm a big fan of Ursula myself, and it was something she said to me years ago about, again, I'd spent 12 years at London College of Fashion, and one thing they did very well was about the education aspect, where every single student had to learn about sustainability or ethical practice within their degree, regardless of what they were doing. It was just brought in, at the time it was Professor Francis Connor, who's now the warden at Goldsmiths. But I think there's something to be said about education at university level. Again, we've got 20,000 fashion students graduating every year in the UK. We don't need any more fashion students. And that's a ridiculous thing to probably say, but it was something that Ursula said to me over some cocktails one night, which was, think about it as, let's create a degree around creative waste engineering. And that's the kind of an innovation that will change the industry, is it making these small changes. I mean, the industry itself is unsustainable. So the future for me is educating a different type of designer. Not thinking that you need a catwalk, not thinking that you need to hit this much in sales, to understand that it's about a lifestyle choice. And Kerry, thank you so much, because I think what you're saying about that reconnection is so important. So I would invite people to look at the work of Kate Fletcher, for example, when we're talking about the craft of use, where we're getting back to what's meaningful to us. The issue is it's a middle class aspect, but it's a middle age concern as well. So we need to get the younger consumers asking about this, feeling that vitality that they do for veganism, or it may even be vegetarianism, and thinking about what they're putting in their skin, putting on their body, and then putting on their body. It's really, you know, this is our spaceship. We need to look after it, but we need to do it very quickly. I think the fast fashion industry is far too big. That has to shrink. It's hyper-localism, so it's producing things within your postcode, understanding the travel of it, but really looking at local producers, really thinking about what you've got in your wardrobe and what you can learn skill-wise to be independent of this massive machine, which is just a capitalist drive toward putting us in and below our neck. So yeah, I think there's optimism, but I think we have to show innovation and how we train our graduates, and they have to push the industry from the inside.
And
Awesome.
one final point I was going to make off the back of what Paul just said is people's perception of veganism, of Extinction Rebellion has changed. It's now mainstream. It wasn't 10 years ago. It wasn't 5 years ago. So that's only a positive thing. It's not just Swampy and people eating mung bean salad that you see, on these marches. It's mainstream. If you read the Daily Mail or the Sun, then you wouldn't actually get a fair representation of how important these issues are to most people. But they are here and they're not going away. Environmentalism is not going to go away. It's not going to be a fad. So that we can take some hope in that is how we act on it, I think.
Yep, definitely.
I just wanted to add I just wanted to add that there's a great book just going on what Paul just said called Cradle to Cradle, which is about rethinking the design process. And I do think that really has inspired me and awoken me to think about the way in which we design things. Design, where is it going to go? Is it going to go afterwards? And can we recycle it? Can we reuse it? Or is it just going to end up on landfill? So I really enjoyed that book. And also the Patagonia owner, and I can't remember his name, wrote a really amazing book as well that speaks to ethical business and really looking after all of the stakeholders in his business. So that's another good book, and I can send you all of those titles. And the last thing I wanted to add was AI. I mean, AI and I've got 2 boys. I am in middle age, like Paul spoke to. So I do think it's about all of us uniting on this front from all generations. But my boy, he's just turned 13 and he's buying a skin for this and a dance for this. And actually the way AI is going to change the future of fashion is really huge. Because would you buy a Dolce & Gabbana dress as a skin and put it on yourself instead of going out to buy an actual dress? I mean, yeah, probably. Spend £15 on buying a designer dress that you're going to wear on social media. So, I think that is going to definitely change the face of how people are showing up towards fashion, and there is a desensitization towards buying online anyway. But then I think there's going to be 2 extremes. I think there's still going to be the sensitive going in. You'll never get away from that human to human contact of going in and getting a feel of fabrics and choosing and that whole well-being cycle of feeling good when you're putting clothes next to your skin and trying them on, and all of that experiential side of purchasing. But I do feel like there's a desensitization with this new generation that are like, oh yeah, they'll just buy things online without touching. And so the AI is another way that it's actually pushing forward this way of relating to fashion in a different way.
Definitely. I feel like we could go on and on for hours about this. You guys have been so incredible, have given us so much knowledge, so much insight, so much to think about. Unfortunately, we do have to let you guys go. I'm really sorry to anyone whose question we didn't get to answer, but hopefully everyone's given you guys something to think about. So we are now going to be taking a quick break. We will be tuning back in at 3 for our debate on whether mass production can ever be ethical. And during that time, we're going to be playing our sponsor reels. For everyone in the audience, please feel free to send in your fashion show videos in your favorite sustainable outfits. And another thank you and round of applause to our speakers. You guys were so incredible. Had the greatest insight. So happy. I feel like I've learned so much and definitely have so many more tactics and things that I can be doing to help myself and help the planet.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us. Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you guys.
Bye.
Bye.